I want to go forward a few slides. Keep going. Couple more. Okay, here. This morning, we're going to give you two aspects of what's needed for evangelism. I love the way Martha Grace Reese put it. You need both the holy and the practical. And you're going to get both today. And you've already gotten a good bit of the holy, right? And we're going to give you some practical pieces that you can take home and try. Our hope is that you're going to be inspired and have a few things that you can take back and say, I'm going to give that a go. I'm going to try that in my context. There's not one way to do this. But there are some things that we've been learning. We're going to share those. Pastor Layla Ortiz had me listen to a TED Talk not long ago. And in it, they talked about this study that was done where they wanted to see if it was true that people who drive really expensive cars are bigger jerks on the road than those who drive cheap cars. And so they did this great study where they had these volunteers go out into the crosswalk and they looked at the values of the cars that were coming up, and I don't know what the discriminator was in terms of what they said was the higher value cars, but what they saw was half of the really expensive cars did not stop for people in the crosswalk. 100%, on the other hand, of the cars that were less expensive did. And so that thought of yours is confirmed. Of ours. What they discovered, though, in another study was that when people have wealth, when they have this sense of of driving this bigger, more expensive car comes a sense of entitlement. What they found in a different study was that if they showed to people a little video at the beginning of the day that was about compassion, right? Little children, that it had a positive effect on them the rest of the day. In other words, they would be less likely to blow through the crosswalk, more likely to stop. And the conclusion of this very psychological, analytical study was that you can influence others with a nudge and a bump, is the way they put it. That people who may start out their day with certain kind of attitude of arrogance can be influenced. That's our hope. That's our expectation. And that somehow in the middle of that, God's there. God's there. So what I'd like to suggest is that for our time together this morning, we will spend some time giving you content, but I would also like it to be more interactive than we've been so far today. And so I'm going to give you some content for some of you who are here with us in the fall. Some of this will be familiar, but I'm going to go deeper into some parts of it. And what we said was that if you need a break, just go and get one and then come back. But we're gonna go at least for the next 45, for about a half an hour, and then we're gonna go into small groups. So that'll be a chance to take a break, just so that you know. Let's go forward just a little bit here. Keep going. One more. So, no, back. Sorry, back. Okay. My clicker ran out of battery, so Peter is gracious enough. Okay. So how do we reach out? This is a bit of a recap from last time, so I'm going to go quickly through this. You need two things if you're thinking about reaching out, and this is very practical. One is to encourage people to make invitations. Invitations to family and friends. Invitations to people who you know are much more likely to have a response. It's like 80%. 80% goes right with what you were saying about that text. Of people who you know are likely to respond positively to an invitation to come to a church-related event. Now, that drops dramatically if you don't know them. So what we want to do is encourage people to invite somebody that they know to come to a church event. And what you can do is think backwards from that. So this is a tool. Christ Church in Fairfax, it's United Methodist Church, they have these cards by the thousands, and they give them to their members, and just to prompt them, to encourage them to invite somebody to come to a church event. And I would encourage you, Vistaprint. Yeah, thank you. Vistaprint is awesome for this. Make a card that fits your congregation. It's a very practical thing to do. Give it to your folks, especially to get started, like around Easter, Christmas. Those are the best. All right, so another way to do this is to think backward. And go to, let's go one more. Create an event that people are likely to invite somebody to. So you have to ask some folks, what kind of event would you invite somebody to come to? Let's create an event like that. And these were some of the ones that we've seen in local churches that have been working. Easter egg hunts, consignment sales. Who knew Easter egg hunts would still be so big, right? But they are, and it's a way to get to know people, just to begin to invite them into some sort of community that is a part of the church. A church is next to an apartment house. They had a cookout and invited the people from that apartment to the cookout just to get to know them, be good neighbors. Blue Christmas service, you know what that is? That's people who are mourning around Christmas time. Create and post these activities. Oh, by the way, I read just recently they did a study of what would be the most, if you were going to just reach out to people in your community and invite them to come to an activity in your church, the thing that would be that they would come to, be most likely to come to, is a meeting about safety in the neighborhood. Kind of makes sense. Right? I mean, and the second thing would be like a concert at the church. The third thing would be a sporting event. This was a study done nationally. So you have to think about your own context. But you get it, right? I mean, people would not necessarily come to a worship service, but if you invite them to, so you got to think in a number of different ways. You're inviting family and friends, that's one kind of event. If you're inviting just people in the neighborhood, you want to get to know them, that maybe is a different kind of event. Do you know Meetup? By the way, we talked about this last time. Meetup is, who here uses Meetup? Can you tell us what it is?
So basically, there are a lot of different groups on there. You can meet up for board meetings, you can meet up for singles or whatever, but you can find different groups to attend. You can post events to it. So for a lot of people posting adults events and other open events for people to get out there. We didn't have a lot of success with it, so we stopped because they're posting.
Yeah, you got to know your context. Some contexts are going to, the young adults may find you more readily. I know some churches have had great experiences with this, and you won't know until you try. So give it a try. Neighborhood newsletters, bulletin boards in condos, Facebook, certainly. Just the ways to get out once you've identified something that you think people will more likely come to. And again, we're thinking outside of a worship service. Worship services are still important, but we need other ways for people to connect, to engage with us, to build relationships. That's how it works. All right. Community listservs. I spoke last time about Shirlington Moms listserv that they hit on for this United Methodist Church's Easter egg hunt. They had like 400 people show up at it. Facebook pages. So find out what works. Talk to the people that you're trying to reach. Measure the results. How did the people who came hear about it? change and pivot to adapt to the needs of the people that are around you, the people that God has called you to love and to get to know. Okay, so here's where we're going to... Any questions about those parts? All right, any thoughts or ideas? What I'd like... Yeah.
I actually have a question for Easter egg hunt.
Yeah.
Does anybody know if they work better to have them rather than on Easter Sunday, on Saturday, or few hours on Easter Sunday? We just had our church meeting.
Anybody have success? I can tell you what I see. A lot of churches are doing it long before Easter. Like this is going to freak us out, but like a Saturday or two before Easter. Yes.
And a lot of local parks, they'll do it all throughout on at least 3 or 4 weekends on both sides of Easter tradition.
Right.
And they bring in the kids, they bring in the parents, they bring in big bucks.
Both sides of Easter.
Yes.
So the week after.
Or so early.
Okay.
After the fact, it's like, oh, okay, these are we left everything. But no, yeah, in the first 4 weeks or so leading up to the event, they'll be all over, especially. And again, thinking outside the box, know your local school district and when they have spring break, what we used to call Easter break. And there they can have it just about any day because the kids and the families you're really targeting for, the kids are in school. And they're looking for things to do with the kids. So as far as you can play in advance, and then, send your prayers to God if you have nice weather, and then you have lots of eggs and lots of kids and lots of connections.
Right. So then we're going to talk a little bit later about what to do when they come. Right now we're just at the very basics of like thinking of something that would be highly invitational. By that I mean that your folks are likely to invite somebody to come to, and B, perhaps most importantly, is the kind of event that might be appealing or engaging to the people in your community, the people you're trying to reach. I can't answer that for you. You have to do the listening to people in your community, which leads me to this. You've all been given a little bless card. We also have this available online, so you can. We've got a couple thousand made. They're not expensive. This is just a prompt, a way. It's like a penny in your shoe. Remember we used to do that? To get us all to be doing what Pastor Poston was talking to us about, being aware of the holy that's around us all the time and the people who we're more likely to pass by if we're not present, but instead to bless them. God called Abraham to be a blessing, and him and his descendants, that includes all of you, to be a blessing to others. So how do we do that in this very concrete way? Often, to bridge with boldness means that people are less likely to come up to you and start a conversation. Usually you have to go and bridge, and I would say, particularly for us, if we're thinking about growing, we're likely to become younger and more diverse than we are right now. The way that this is going to work best is that if you pray and open your eyes and your heart to seeing somebody around you who is younger and different culturally, maybe even economically than you are. The church isn't going to grow much as at the programmatic level in that way. It will if you get to know people and through those relationships, develop that with a younger person, the person who's different than you, and push yourself a little bit. It's going to feel uncomfortable, maybe a little bit. That's okay. God works with that. And in so doing, just get to know them. So bridge with boldness, walk across the room. And it's interesting, this is true even with family and friends. I think it was Mother Teresa who said the place we have to start is in our own living rooms, right? Loving the people in our own house, and then our neighbors, and then our friends. Do you know, remember that horrific case that's in the news right now of the family in California that had kept their own children captive, right? Do you hear the neighbors? When the neighbors are saying, I had no idea. And there were a couple of them that were really convicted by this, and they said, you know what? From now on, I'm going to make an effort to get to know the people who are living around me. I found that to be convicting for myself. I used to know everyone who lived around me, and now people have moved in. I don't know them as much. I've got to make an effort to get to know them because it's less likely that they're going to throw a block party. They don't even know, but I can do that. I can get to know them. If we do this right, we're just going to be better human beings, if nothing else, right? Bridge with boldness. Cross the divide to get to know somebody new. Or to reintroduce yourself to a friend who you haven't seen in a long time, or a family member who's a little distant, and then listen to them. Amy Savimla used to say, especially if you go to meet with a young adult who's been apart from church for a while, ask them about that, and then shut up. Don't say anything else. Just let them talk. Listening is such a powerful thing, right? Eat with friendliness, that's the way of Christ. In how many different people's homes did Christ eat? But for us, maybe it's just invite somebody to have a cup of coffee. That's a really safe thing to do at a Starbucks, or a sandwich, and listen. Listen to them. And what are you listening for? What do you listen for when you listen to somebody who you're getting to know? Think deeper. What would you listen for? Their story? What's that? Body language? Mm-hmm. How they were raised up in the church? Anything that's bothering them or unsure of? Pain, right? Joy. That's what you're listening deeply. It's such a loving thing to do. It really is the way of Christ. Just to make yourself available. Spend time. So, and then that leads to service. Sometimes when you're listening to somebody, you may find that this is a single mother and she's getting ready to move. Maybe we can pull a few people from church together and help her. Or maybe they're lonely and just having a cup of coffee every now and then is the thing, right? What's the nudge of compassion that's welling up inside of you as you're listening? And then the thing I want to spend a few moments on here is the last one, because it's the one that for us is perhaps the most scary in some ways, to share with conviction our own story of faith, a little bit of our own experience of God. And here's where I want to drill down a little bit. And I would say, think about using these cards as give them to your folks for Lent, maybe in your congregation. I think if this happens, by the way, it's going to happen because we get below the level of pastor. And we start seeing ourselves as teams of God's people doing God's work in the world. Pastors are coaches. We're supposed to be the ones who are kind of helping to motivate, but we're not. We are a team. And I know that we can do this. So on the back of the card, by the way, is this little reminder of I have to work on names sometimes, especially if I just met somebody. So you meet somebody who's the barista at a coffee house. Or for me, I told the story last time of the bike guy at REI, whose name is Rob, who I made a connection with, right? We're talking about going for a mountain bike ride sometime. I haven't done it yet, but every time I come in, I have that connection with him. And I say a prayer occasionally for him, right? Just to build a connection, a relationship with him. You write the name down, and you can, if you want, think about what you've done to have I eaten with them. Maybe some sort of a meal or a cup of coffee or a beer or something would be good. So the share with conviction. Here's where we need to think like a parent to our own self. The parent who has a toddler who is just learning how to put words to stories. Words to their emotions, right? Remember that? And when they're like that, sometimes you have to remind them, they say, use your words, right? And then they begin to put words to it. For us as Lutherans who have come, especially if you, like me, grew up in the church and you have faith has always been there, but you never had that experience where you didn't have it and then you had it, right? And sometimes you can be envious of people who have that experience because it's this big woof. But for those of us who grew up in the faith, who slowly kind of came to it and have had epiphanies along the way, moments of the mountains with God, it's a little more. We have to spend a little more time thinking about what are the things that are important to you in the faith, that are experiences. How would you put it as to why it is that you're Christian? There are three things that are helpful to think about answering. Why Jesus? So if you can tell somebody, why is it that you're a follower of Jesus? What was it about his life, or what's touched you, right? The second one is when you can answer that question, well, why do I need church? To somebody, right? So I believe, a lot of people believe, but they're not a part of a congregation. Why is it important to be part of a larger group of people? What value does that bring to my following of Christ? And then the third one is, why my church? What is it about your congregation that you want somebody else to know? If you can think about those three things, those came from Matt Miofsky years ago when we were meeting with him, Methodist pastor. He said those are the three that he wants his people to be able to answer. I'd like to take just a few minutes to think about that first one for you. And we sent out ahead of time. Did everybody get it? A little paper. I want to give you just a couple of talks. The idea is to write 100 words, not more. Less is okay. 100 words about a little bit about what it means for you to be a follower of Jesus. What does it mean for you to claim faith? How would you share this with somebody? And the reason for doing this is so that when you have it, you have some phrases in mind that God will then bring up in you as you're having conversations. I usually say, if you're listening to somebody and you're having this conversation with them, usually don't bring up God until they do. But when they do, be ready. And this will help you get ready. This is just for you. And I will invite, if somebody wants to try it, to share with the group. But I want you to just experiment for yourself with 100 words. How would you put it? And I'll give you a couple of examples here. Did anybody do this, by the way? You did? Oh, a couple people did. Does anybody want to try? I'll prime the pump with one or two of these. And then if somebody wants to try, I'd be really enthused to hear it. So this is from a church in Chicago. I played a couple of these. This is a little different than the ones that we played before. This is, I think,
I was a lonely person. I had a family, but they were going through their...
I have no idea how I do that. Do that again if I can. Let's see. No. Do you know how to do this? The words when I tried it before. Let's see. Okay.
their own issues, including the divorce.
I'm just going to turn up the volume here.
I was a lonely person. I had a family, but they were going through their own issues, including a divorce. There was no one for me to turn to but God. One of my earliest memories is of me playing alone in my room and asking God to be with me. At the time, I was maybe 4 years old. Unfortunately, my family problems didn't get any better for over a decade. That aching loneliness haunted me, clung to me like a frightened child. But God, through the Holy Spirit, stayed with me. He was always there. He has been my family and my best friend. With God, I have been able to have my needs met. Jesus is called Emmanuel, God with us. My own experience is proof of that. While I now have good, genuine friends and a healthy life, God is still with me. Even when my loneliness returns, Emmanuel God remains with me.
Does anyone have one ready to go? You want to try? Okay. Oh, no, I can't read it for you. We're all here with you. And you're very brave to give it a go if you're willing. Come on, stand up with me. Yeah, stand up with me. Let's come on. Sure. Let's give her a little encouragement. This is a brave thing to do.
Hi, I'm Cecilia Brown, and I'm with Holy Cross Lutheran Church in Herndon. And I got this email from one of our members, and I was in the middle of doing my homework when I got it, and I just prayed on it and took a break from the homework and just let whatever come out, and try to keep it in the 100 words because I'm a little bit of a perfectionist. So this is exactly 100 words. So I wrote, and I quoted this, "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound to save a wench like me. I am a wench, meaning a servant of God, through Jesus Christ, his only Son. Accepting I am the servant relieves me of all the energy involved in trying to have everything figured out ahead of what's meant to be. Thy will be done." This is what I say to myself whenever I try to start running the show. I'm a grateful servant who keeps rowing my boat through my human fear, as I know he is with me and will never give me something I cannot handle.
Amen. Thank you. Anyone else willing to read 100 words? And I would encourage you to read it, because if you speak it, it's going to be longer than 100 words. It just will. You get up and you feel and you just go. That's why writing it out is so important. So we want to take a few minutes here and give you some quiet time to think about 100 words. Don't try to be perfect. That was beautiful in that you just let it go, right? And you can fix it up later. What you'll find are some phrases that come to you. There's a businesswoman I knew one time, and she had this phrase that I'm a woman of God. And that came to her, and she was able to talk about what that meant for her, and she could talk about it even with her business associate. So do you have in your packet the page, and is there a pen in the packet too? Or do we have pens? Yes. So 100 words about your faith. Why is it that you are a follower of Jesus? What is it that, search back in your memory of something that was important to you that you experienced with God. Now, for some people, it may be, maybe you need to go and think about like a moment at the communion meal. Maybe it was, that just that experience of God there. Or maybe it was a night in your room praying, or when you were sick as a child, as an adult. Think of something. Try to take the moment and think of something where God is particularly real to you. Keep it clear, short. We have pens. See what phrase. I know it's a struggle, and I appreciate that it's not easy. We don't do this as Lutherans. This is new to us.
There'll be a break before.
Is a part of our synod-wide effort called New Connections. It is an effort to reach 3,000 new people to be a part of our congregations over the next 3 years. And we think this is a very doable goal that is very possible. All of us learning from each other and working together, making an effort at doing this. I know that it's possible. 3,000 seems like such a huge number, but divided by 75 is actually much more reasonable. We're starting 3 churches that will worship services that will bring in a lot of new people in and of themselves. So we've raised about $950,000 in cash and commitments, and we have we set a goal of $2.25 million that will help fund everything that we are dreaming of doing, and I'll talk more about that a little bit later. One piece of that you might avail yourself of. I want to introduce the next part, which is, what do you do when folks come? And we take that for granted. People just walk in, right? So, and I'd like you to think about this for Sunday morning primarily, but beyond that, what do you do when people come to, like somebody was saying, they do a blood drive, or to the Easter egg hunt, or to, what do you do? How do you welcome them and connect with them to help them get more engaged? So, Pastor Kathy Rosenholtz is. She started her ministry in the church that I grew up in Jamaica, Queens, and had been doing evangelism work in the New York Synod, and is now at Augustana in Washington, D.C. So thank you.
Thank you for having me here today. I've been in the Synod exactly a year, and it is good to meet some more people and to get to know folks from outside the district and to be here today. I bring a background, as Reverend Hirsch says, in helping lead some evangelism workshops in the Metro New York Synod, and specifically connecting that to welcoming people to worship. So that tends to be my focus, but I'm going to talk a little more broadly than that today. In Metro New York Synod and in my first parish, we had neighbors and parishioners from many, many countries of origin. Bishop Bowman was very fond of saying that we worshiped in 20 3+ languages on Sunday morning in my first congregation, people from 25 countries of origin, and it was such a blessing. And I don't come to you even with that background as an expert, but as a journeyer with you, I can say that things that my senior colleague and I were utterly convinced of when we used to do evangelism workshops didn't work at all at my second parish. So I think that each context is unique, and I hope that some of what I say will be useful to you and, more importantly, speak to your hearts as you seek to be about sharing the good news. So I want to start about talking, we said welcome in, and I know you were very careful to say welcome in, not welcome them in, or welcome. What do we call the people that we're welcoming? What do you think? Someone may have seen my second slide already, because I tested out the thing.
Yes.
Yes, third slide. We're going to get there. Yes, what else? Friends? Visitors? Oftentimes, and I didn't look at the little things in the pews here, oftentimes the pre-printed materials from the church say visitors. What does the word visitors imply? Yes. Yes. Visitor tends to be a one-time thing. And occasionally, I know at Augustana, we get folks who, their parents have come into town, and so the parents live somewhere totally different, and this may be the one time they're visiting, or someone came in for a meeting. But oftentimes, they're not expecting to be or hoping to be a one-time visitor. So we might use the word guest. What does this word imply? Yes. What? Temporary?
They've been invited.
They've been invited. What? They're welcome. They're not visitors. What? When we welcome a guest to our home, and we're going to treat them well. I mean, there's no judgment in talking about these words, but here's the assumption behind seeing people who come to church as a guest. While it is certainly a reality that newcomers, and that's the word I'm getting to, have perhaps been invited, are within your church home, it's very different than your own home, because a sane guest can assume that this is ours and we are welcoming you. There's some beauty in that, but there is a question about who the church actually belongs to, which is Christ. Newcomers. This is the word that over the years my colleagues and I have encouraged people to use, and it's in fact the word that we use on our materials. I teach a newcomers class, not a new members class, and we can get into a big conversation about what membership means in a postmodern age, but we don't have time for that today. Another term that we've used is first-time worshipers. Sometimes in making announcements, they'll say, if this is the first time you're worshiping with us, so what does that assume? There's going to be a second time, yes. We welcome you in a particular way. We explain the red book, we explain the bulletin, whatever. We expect that they will come back. And we welcome newcomers for who they are and the gifts that they are bringing, so that we see them as essential to who we are as a community, to what we are about as a church, even to the sense of the Spirit being present. They are part of the body. So let's go to a biblical story. It's a particular rendition of it. Anyone know what story this might be before I launch into it? So, isn't that interesting?
Moses and the oaks of Edom.
So, Abraham, and you can't, it's dark enough, you can't quite see Sarah, in the little tent there, or the house as they have depicted it. Genesis 18. Abraham and Sarah welcome 3 strangers to their tent. Abraham literally bends down to the ground to welcome these strangers, these newcomers. And in so doing, he and Sarah, in setting this feast before these 3 strangers, welcome the very presence of the Holy One. God come to meet them in some way. The presence of the Holy One who then blesses them. This image of Abraham bending down, I connect with the idea of us bending over backwards to welcome the newcomer, fully believing that in welcoming the newcomer, we are welcoming the very presence of the Holy. Each person brings their story. As you were trying to write down your 100 words and thinking back through the story of how God has come to meet you, that moment, that Kairos pregnant moment, was holy. In your story of encountering God, I'm guessing that many of you wrote down remembrances of people who facilitated for you that encounter. We bend down to welcome the newcomer. And so I'm going to tell you a story. This was the bishop or the president of the Lutheran Church in Guyana. Guyana, a country on the north coast of South America, British, used to be British Guyana, only English-speaking country in South America. Caribbean culture, very, very much similar to Trinidad. Most of my parishioners in my first church were from Guyana. And in 1999, a group of us from Metro New York Synod went to Guyana and spent about 10 days there. And I was visiting with family members of folks from my parish, preached in a parish there, spent some time with, at that time, the only female pastor in the Lutheran Church in Guyana, her church. And one day we went into the interior on the Berbice River. The only way to get there was about 25 kilometers over a very bumpy, rutted, muddy road, and then about 2 hours on these boats. So we were on one boat taking this picture, and Pastor Tucker Dial and some of the other folks were in the other boat. And we went in to see Grace Lutheran Church in DeVelt on the interior. We got, side note, got out of the boat, and the first thing the caretaker of that church said to us, "What's this I hear about a Lutheran Roman Catholic agreement?" We had just signed the agreement on justification, and they wanted to talk about it. Awesome. We were there for a long time. We saw the site of the church, first Lutheran church in the New World, and it was warm, to put it mildly, and I had brought a granola bar, but it had been a really long time since breakfast, and it was going to be a long time till dinner. Well, we get back on the boat, and this gentleman, and the gentleman who was doing our boat, this is what they do for a living. They took us to their house. And at their house, the family gathered and set before us a feast. Someone had killed an animal called a lava. It had made cook-up rice with lava, little bits of meat and rice and beans, and it was delicious, and fresh cherry juice, and it was served to us on sort of a whole bunch of china plates, cracked china plates. And not only were we fed, not only were we treated with such a gracious and hospitable welcome and generosity, the 2 gentlemen who had the boats had gone all the way back the 20-something miles on the river to town to buy those styrofoam containers to send us back with all of the rest of the food. A family that probably could have used that. This is the kind of welcome we're talking about that God provides for us. and that we are called to provide in our churches. A biblical welcome. So a few years ago, when I was in my second call, actually that was a long time ago now, I came up with this way of structuring how I think about church life. And yesterday, as I was writing the final part of our annual report for tomorrow, I added something to it, which I'll tell you about. If we think about everything we do being about welcoming the newcomer, seeing things through the eyes of the newcomer, it affects how we think about each part of our church life. From worship to education, and education being about discipleship, making disciples, gathering us, newcomer and longtime person alike, into this process of deepening into the life of discipleship. Loving service, community in Christ, offering our gifts, making a difference in the world is how I usually write it, and evangelism. So that evangelism is not a separate committee. Oh, those are the people who are comfortable going door to door. Those are the people who are comfortable talking to others. But this welcome of the very presence of the holy in the newcomer is found in how we think about every single part of our church life. I added yesterday the word all. Welcome all, because Augustana, that's what we are about, of people of every rainbow diversity you could think of. And also because I wanted to work in the fact that it also includes administration, leadership, and the legacy your church is leaving. So welcome all. I'm going to focus today a bit right now on the worship piece of it. So practical realities. People are coming. How does your church building look through the eyes of a newcomer? I can't tell you how wonderful, what a great experience it is to have a friend of yours who maybe would be willing to do this for you, who doesn't do church or even goes to a different one, but especially if they don't do church, do you a favor of just coming to your church and experiencing, starting with the building. I can tell you that it's really interesting to be talking about this serving at Augustana, because Augustana is the most confusing building I have ever served in. It took me 2 weeks to figure out which end of the building I was on when I was below the sanctuary. Tom knows. Do they know what door to come through? Are they going to encounter 2 locked doors before they get to the open door, which is what I did today? What does it feel like to walk up to your church for the first time? Is it welcoming? Are the doors open? Do they know which door to come in? Have we cleaned up the house to welcome the stranger? What do you do when you know someone's coming over? Screw it. And then this gets back to, okay, no analogy is perfect. We're kind of back to the guest in the house. But have you ever noticed that when you have been in a space for a while, you don't see anymore the stuff? And we Lutherans are frugal, and we keep stuff because we might need it someday. And sometimes it is therefore in the corner of your sanctuary, in the corner of your parish hall, blocking the way in. Or you come in the narthex, and what's a narthex? Okay, we'll talk about language in a minute. Have we cleaned it up? Is there signage that will help them see where to go? And what questions and fears will they have? How can the church help? Here's an interesting fear. What am I supposed to wear? We're going to talk about that when we talk about websites. Are people that are going to talk to me? What happens in worship? And where do I go? Want to know one of the big fears / questions / importance of science? Bathroom. What am I going to do if I'm in the bathroom? Which church was I in? I think it was my second call where you had to walk to the front of the sanctuary to get to the door to the bathroom. And there's certain things, there's nothing you can do about your building, but it's, so in my, when I was home, so I served in Metro New York for 11 years, went home to Columbia, Missouri for 8 years to be near elderly parents for their final journey. And while I was home in Columbia, Collegetown, USA, I ended up serving the local Episcopal church. And we used at one point this wonderful sort of audit of your church that had been provided by the Methodist Church. And I couldn't find a link for that, but I've got to refine that. It really helps you look at your whole building through the eyes of a newcomer. And one of the things we realized is that at a crucial point, coming into what was generally a very clean, inviting, and welcoming building, at this transition to the set of steps, there was a little bulletin board, and it had on it the vestry minutes. Vestry is Episcopal speak for church council. It didn't help anyone. There was many other places those could be. We took that, we put a bright piece of paper on it, and we put arrows on where to go for worship, where to go for bathrooms, where Sunday school was, and we had a little schedule of what was happening that day that changed each week. Simple paper, it didn't cost us much of anything besides the printing. In thinking about signs, when we think about getting in the church, a lot of times we just go, well, we know where that is. Again, have someone help you audit that. Part of my talk today grew out of a talk I did at a worship seminar on talking about ushers and greeters. So I'll just a quick note on this. If any of you is an usher or a greeter, you are absolutely important to this process. Because your friendliness, your openness, your hospitality, I was greeted so graciously at the door, thank you, today, and welcomed in. It's very much the first face of what people will encounter when they get there. It's good to know all the practical responsibilities and to be really thinking about your responsibilities as an usher or greeter being primarily about greeting people who are new, primarily about helping people who are new. How many of you have ever been in a church or visited a church where when you walked in the door, there was like a pile of bulletins, but no one actually even greeted you? That works for folks who have been there for a long time, but it can be very confusing and unwelcoming for others. Some churches that are blessed with parking lots, we are not, at Augustana, could think about having parking ushers or other greeters who are actually outside your building, especially if, like Augustana, there could be a variety of doors that people could choose from. Or once they're inside, it wouldn't be clear how to get where they need to get. This is something that didn't used to be on our evangelism workshop 20 years ago. It needs to be now because statistics I've seen puts it well over 50%. I think it's over 75% at this point, especially of younger generations. Their first encounter with you is through your website. I'd be the first to say we're working on renovating Augustana. If you go look at it, I don't know that we're doing all of this very well yet. We have the one is ready to go. It's probably going to be online in the next few days, the new one. Front and center, because that's why we're looking. Clear worship service times and styles. A little description about that. Augustana's church doesn't say we're higher than God. It probably should. That's just who we are. I think people kind of know that. But if you have different kinds of styles, in my most recent parish, Calvary Episcopal Church in Columbia, Missouri, we didn't have it on the front and center front page. We had the times there. But then you went to the worship page, just one sentence. A clean, inviting interface. There's so many catchy websites out there that I think it's sometimes tempting for churches to do things where there's just a lot going on it and things move and clean and simple can work a lot better. And I encourage us to think about websites that are accessible. There is background technology that you can do that makes the website accessible for people who cannot see or don't hear. Have your contact info. That sounds so obvious. But I have been to websites for churches where it was really, really hard to find. Even better, these days it's quite easy to embed a Google map. Show what we believe. Maybe even have some of those 100-word stories, but definitely what your church believes, what the Lutheran Church believes, connect to the ELCA. Address the fear questions. So here's where you can say, what am I supposed to wear? People really do ask that question. We used to describe it on Calvary's website. Are children welcome? Are noisy children welcome? Are they welcome in worship? Is my demographic truly welcome? One of the great beauties of serving at Augustana is that for decades, 60 plus years, we have been providing a generous and heartfelt and delighted welcome to people of all races, and since the 80s, we've been kind of a gay church for a long time. All really means all, but sometimes that's a question. Yes?
Yeah, I mean, you communicate on it and say, yes, everyone's welcome, because you look, everyone's welcome, so you hear. So,
Right.
how do you communicate that?
Right.
How sounding, accessible to you?
Right. I think sometimes both our language and our pictures can help us see who is already present. So if your church is a rainbow of diversity, have your pictures reflect that. If your church worship is in English and Spanish, have some of your website be in Spanish. If your church does take perhaps a less open position on certain questions before the church, there are ways to say that in the what we believe section that will communicate, and people will look for that. This front door has the reconciling in Christ hearts on it. Saw that immediately. That's code language. We're going to get there in a second. But it speaks to those who might be looking for that symbol. Does the website, do your bulletins use insider language? Yes.
Yeah, just on the website, so many people now are using their cell phones, so does it work
Yes.
well on the cell phone?
That's such a great question. Accessibility is a question as well when it comes to being literally able to look at it on your phone. And your webmaster, or if you're using one of those, kind of build your own, like WordPress, they're constantly working to update that, and there often will be options to look at. And that's another place where somewhat simpler can often work better with a mobile interface.
A couple of years ago, we did a survey, some of you may remember, of every congregation on our synod's website. The one thing that we found that was so common was that they were out of date. So if you still have Christmas Eve services on your website now, is the time to update.
Right.
It's better to have a static
Yes.
homepage that's geared for first-time visitors, and then have another web page where you do all the fancy stuff for members. So that's
Right, and have the front page be not something, we at Calvary, we had a front page that had 3 columns in it that had been built before I got there that were basically almost like a blog. You had to be updating, and boy, if you didn't update that, and I thought, there's probably better to put that on a background page. When it comes to language, we sometimes use shorthand that speaks to the people that are already there, but does not speak to newcomers, and that's something to keep an eye on. Is there another way to say this? Is something to ask yourself in looking not only at your website, but also, truthfully, at your worship bulletins, your announcements. The Phyllis Circle will be meeting. What's that? Put in parentheses. Define what that is.
Sorry to take this
I understand it's a guest list, but I don't know what a newcomer is.
Ah, okay. So a newcomer is someone that is coming for the first time, or first, second, third, someone that has not been an ongoing part of your community. It's a different way of saying guest in that implies that we see in them, we see in the experience not so much us welcoming a guest to our home, but that we invite and embrace the newcomer to be a part of us. It's probably semantics, but I think it's meaningful. Thank you for asking.
And growing bigger churches tend to use that word.
If you can't change a word, if you can't change what something's called, explain it. Okay, so let me get to worship. How much I got? Like 5 minutes?
Yes.
So that clock is passed. All right. Here's my number one question. Are you as a congregation, you as people coming into your worship service, are you expectant about worship? Do you believe the Spirit is present? We Lutherans are a quiet bunch, generally. Not across the board, but generally. Episcopalians are too. The old joke about someone coming into church and saying, "Praise the Lord," in the middle of the worship service, and someone turning around and go, "Oh, you don't praise the Lord till age 94. That works for both Lutherans and Episcopalians somehow. But here's the thing. This is the theological heart of this. If we believe that the Spirit is truly present, a lot of this other stuff, programs for evangelism, technical things that we can do, while important, it's not as important as this. If we fully believe that somehow we are being transformed by the very presence of the gospel of God's good news in Jesus Christ, and that Spirit is being poured out in and through us and connecting us to the newcomers that are coming as well as to each other, that will communicate itself. And that matters more than anything else. That's what newcomers are going to respond to. That doesn't mean we all have to be all jumping up and down and praising, because not every church is going to do that. And like I said, Augustine has this incredibly formal way of worshiping, but the Spirit is present, and we believe that. Will newcomers know what is expected in the worship service and how to do it? And how will they know it? How do they know where to stand, sit, kneel? What to do during communion? I'm going to go fast here. Is the bulletin in code? Are you still using hymn boards? Is it clearly explained somewhere what all that means? Or can you do an all-in-one bulletin? 20 years ago, 15 years ago, when we were teaching these workshops, all-in-one bulletins using materials from sundaysandseasons.com were all the rage. It's probably old news at this point, and many people are doing it, but I encourage it if it is something you haven't explored before. Meaning that most of the worship service, most everything people need who are walking in for the first time, who didn't grow up in the church, didn't grow up in the Lutheran church, will somehow know how to get through the worship service and will feel welcomed. How can we help the newcomer participate? When we used to teach this workshop in Metro New York, my senior colleague from my first church was utterly convinced that we had to give verbal instructions in worship. That we tell people what page we're on, that we tell people what's happening next, that we say we're going to do this next. I cannot do that in Augustana. I would be in big trouble if I did that in Augustana. So there's other ways as well. We can help someone in the pew. We can sit down next to them. We can make sure that without being kind of aggressive, that we're welcoming and talking and guiding people. When we're flipping back and forth from the hymns to the Nicene Creed, we help someone find it. The goal is that no one should feel awkward or exposed as a newcomer. We used to do a lot of talking about introverts and extroverts, but one thing, I don't know, I won't ask. One thing never, ever to do is to ask people to stand up and introduce themselves. I'm assuming this is old news at this point. So, the people's 3 greatest fears. Rick Warren talks about this actually. Are being at a party surrounded by strangers, having to speak in front of people, and being asked a personal question in public. Basically, you are asking newcomers to encounter their 3 greatest fears here. So, let's talk. When you seek to welcome the newcomer, when you seek to be a church and be a people that bends over backwards to encounter the holy in each and every person who comes through the doors, or maybe even is kind of hanging out outside the doors watching. What do you do? What do you think you might want to do at your parish to live more deeply into that experience? Or if you already are, let's talk about that. Or if you have questions. Yes. It's so important for Lutherans to talk about this. We are the whitest denomination. Our stated goal in 1988 has nowhere near been met, and that was a very modest goal of 10%, and we are still 97% white as a denomination. First of all, a genuine sense that the Spirit is present, a genuine belief that encountering the other, we are encountering the very presence of God. I can't say that enough. And notice what Abraham does. I didn't talk so much about the bending over backwards, and we got to talk about Sarah here too. Because he says, let me set this feast before you. And then what does he do? He runs to the tent and says, quick, can you do this? And she makes a huge feast. We each have different roles in this welcome. He bends over backwards. We have to be willing to change. So think about what happens when the Spirit of the Holy One encounters you. Does it leave you the same? Are we? Yes.
So I'm in the communications class right now. I'm talking with some guys about 7 months ago. But one of the things we just talked about was this famous poet named Maya Angelou. What she said was, people may not remember what you said, they will always remember how you made them feel.
Yes.
And I think keeping that, when I first came to Holy Cross, I was walking into the parking lot to the building, and that's like the scariest time for everybody who's going to a new church. And there may be people around you walking at the same time, and they don't say good morning, or hey, hi, or something, just a little something, you know, that means so much, especially when it comes to Cross.
Yes. Let me connect this back over to your question. So one is, this is a huge question. It's something that ELCA and each of us individually as churches needs to be continuing to work on. Some of it really comes back to the first part of today, which is being out there in the community, because we need to listen first. But since my part is what happens when people come, it's about being authentically who we are while also recognizing that in the Spirit's transforming presence in the newcomer, we may be changed. Let me quickly, I'll come right to you. I was debating whether I want to say this story. So while I was in process coming towards August 8th, I was interviewing at a variety of congregations across different parts of the United States. And in one of the meetings with the call committee, literally it was said to me, We know we need to become more diverse, but they're going to make us change, and we don't want to. At least that was honest. But I immediately pulled out of the process. Change, the transformative grace of God does not always mean that we're going to be comfortable with it, but the beauty that results, hearing people's stories and finding our lives transformed by it, our community transformed by it, our worship, yes, transformed by it, is so worth it. Okay. To serve on the council.
I've heard that it's better to let the newcomers sit and worship. Enough information from invited to a small group or so of that. Don't get connected with a small group of people instead of this overwhelming.
Yeah.
Well,
I guess when I talk, and I can speak kind of enthusiastically, when I talk about that sense of bending over backwards and the overwhelming grace of God, I think I'm talking more about the interior sense of how we are considering newcomers when we meet them. The cultural context of your congregation, of you, the person coming, will all help shape what that looks like in reality. And there can be very gentle ways of helping someone that looks totally confused in the pew. For an extrovert, they may be perfectly happy to have someone come, sit down with them, welcome them, show them through the worship. Someone else who really wants some space. But if you're standing behind them and you see they're not anywhere near finding page 104 with the Nicene Creed on it, you can just simply hand them the book with it there. So there's little things like that.
Just to piggyback on that comment, that's why I think the usher greeter ministry in our congregations is so important, and that the people who do it have the charisms, have the gifts for that ministry to be sensitive to. There are some people who are going to come in for the first time, and they want you to know they're there. They're ready to engage. And so they need somebody who's going to have a pick up on that. And then there are others who are, I always refer to as the stealth worshipers. They want to come in under the radar. They just want to get their bulletin and they just want to be a sponge. And so people have to be sensitive to that. And then the other thing in my last call that I stressed a lot was the importance of greeting on the way out.
Yes.
Somebody who's a newcomer coming for the first time, they're not ready to engage deeply on the way in. But once they've experienced worship or they've experienced the community, now on the way out, maybe when they have questions, and to have greeters at the same doors, the same people who are seeing people on the way in, as well as on the way out, and then ready to engage and answer those questions.
And I have two things to kind of tag off of that. One is, I can't stress enough the importance of having engaging, clean, bright, welcoming spaces with as much information as you can provide on the walls, whether that's bulletin boards or whatever. We're really limited on that in our current context. But one of the things that allows is for introverts who do not want to talk to people or are not comfortable talking to people to have something to do while they're waiting, and a way of engaging with your church where they learn quite a bit, but they don't necessarily have to be overwhelmed by the conversation. The other thing is, and this, I was aware of time, so I didn't do a whole slide on hospitality hour, or fellowship hour, or coffee hour, or whatever we're calling it in our particular context. One of our fastest growing demographics at Augustana is young adults. All of the young adults who live right around us in the northwest part of the district, for the most part, new to the district, working a lot, probably living alone, definitely looking for community. And so not only do the ushers and I myself say, hey, we've got a whole bunch of food downstairs and you're totally welcome, and we'll have someone show you how to get there, which is necessary in our context. But when they get there, there's a table, and now there's starting to be so many, 2 tables filled with young adults who make a point of, in not an overwhelming way, but it's a really, genuine way. Hey, hi, let's hang out together. So the day we were making Advent wreaths, the first Sunday of Advent, I looked over at that table. There was 2 people there who had only come a couple of times. 2 people who had been coming maybe about 3 months, and one person who was completely new that day, chit-chatting and making Advent wreaths. So something to, in a genuine way, say you are fully welcome here. I can't tell you the number of times I've been visiting a church where even if the worship experience was fairly welcoming, when it came to standing around in the lobby area and or going to coffee hour, there was a lot of little groups and no connection.
Yeah, again, one of the surveys that we did was we had groups of people visit as secret worshipers in many of our congregations, and the overwhelming, one of the most important observations was that often people felt like the church looked really welcoming for the people who already knew each other. And one young adult said, I think I could join there if I really tried hard.
All right, how much more time do I have?
Why don't we take 5 minutes?
Okay.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
We have what we call a community breakfast once a month. It's kind of like a potluck, but they cook pancakes fresh, and they have a bacon and sausage. It's provided by the staff generally, but egg dishes and bagels and cream cheese and so forth. So we do a really good job once a month.
Yeah. Very good. And again, thinking about that through the eyes of the newcomer, how would a newcomer know that they're welcome, and once they get there, that they where to go, what to do, and how to get together. Who have I not called on yet? Okay.
What do you recommend as the next step? So they walk out and have their information. Should someone call them?
Isn't that the third part of today's workshop? Okay, I'm going to defer. Point. But yes, that's crucially important. Yeah. Wait a minute.
Kind of following up on what Bill said, some reader suggests that 19 out of 20 churches, and most of us would not find it, just as my church and many services, is sharing of peace is very awkward to guests visitors first time. And when I look after, I can always identify guests. They're just standing like this, and it's a fun festival out there.
This is where I'm going to put on my high church hat in a couple of ways. One is that we need to recover a sense of the peace being about the sharing of the peace of God and not how's your cousin today. And that we as pastors probably need to occasionally at least be doing some explaining of what the different parts of the worship service are there for. And not assume that everybody already knows, but yes. Okay.
No, I just want to make a couple points. It is what it is when you worship at a church that was built in 1866.
Yeah.
That's our fourth building. So wow. We're in our 253rd year. But number one, we can put the whole service in the Lord. Mm-hmm. We have done that. All verbiage, all hymns are in the Lord. Mm-hmm. We don't even need people.
We did that at my first parish, and I'll talk more about that when you're done.
Number two, as far as all newcomers, if we can catch them as they come into the church, we have name tags. They get a name tag with their name. So when we share the peace, we already know their name. We try to speak their name. And when the pastor gives communion, she can speak their name. This is why. For you. Okay. We try to do that. And we also have instituted with our interim pastor She tells us every week when we go down to fellowship, we try to observe 5 minutes. The first 5 minutes, you speak and say hello to a visitor or a parishioner that does not come to church often. Then you go into your little groups, and then you have to talk about stuff happening in the week, or you conduct little church visits and stuff like that. But she instills upon us the 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, because that is important. People don't stay long when they're in need. Thank you so much. I'd love to continue the conversation at some point.
So we're going to move back to the other presentation and talk about then how, this should be here, point one of those. When people come, how do we help them to make a deeper connection with us? Because people will come, we hope and pray that they will have an experience of the holy, and that will mean something to them. But we know that people need more than that. I was at a church not far from here called Metro DC. It was called Metro Church. And at that church, they said, if you're a newcomer, we're glad you're here. We have these Metro groups, which are for you to think about. Maybe one of them will appeal to you. We'd love for you to join them. And they were like hiking groups, and I don't know, like there were some exercise groups. There were some Bible study groups. There was a whole variety of things. And here's what they said. They said, the reason why we want you to do this is because it's not enough for you to be alone with God. Like that's a good experience, and maybe a lot of your 100-word faith statements got to that. That's important, but it's not enough. You need other people in your lives that you can you can unpack your life, you can reflect on it in the light of faith. And so we want you to have these friends. Yeah. And so here's what we're going to do after church. There are going to be people out on the way out. They didn't use the word narthex. I had a musician who said, "What is that? Sounds like a drug." So on the way out, you can.
What's the name of the file?
It's called Event 2, and. So out there, you'll see some people standing with the signs of what it is that they're doing. Go and we'd love to spend a few minutes with you. The last time that we met, we had somebody from Christ Church in Fairfax. They have just 2 minutes for newcomers. They invite them to come to the banner up front, and they'll talk about the church. The most important thing for you to ask is the next, what you were saying, what happens when they come? Is to be ready with what comes next for them. And I tell you, this is the number one thing I see in churches that are growing, is that they make it clear, if you're a newcomer, they make the next step clear so that if somebody, when they're ready, they can take that with you. Now it may be, so here's one way you can talk about it, right? Again, this is semantics, but it's important. You can say, we're having soup supper on Wednesday night in Jacob's room, and you can go to the narthex and on the right-hand side sign up. That's all coded, right? I've learned to mountain bike in the last few years, and it's like I can tell you that I ride a hardtail on a single track at Fountainhead. That probably makes as much sense to you as what I just said about the bulletin or the soup and supper is to a newcomer. So instead you say, and we have this ancient tradition in the church as we're preparing for these 40 days of when we think about the life of Jesus. We gather for some simple food on Wednesday evenings. We'd love for you to come along as you leave, just to let us know how many people to prepare for it. If you wouldn't mind signing up, that'd be great. It's right. It just takes a little practice. We have to step back again and think, what are the words that we're using that we'll connect with? And then, of course, most importantly, is having that thing for them to connect, having that ready, having that in mind. So as you're welcoming newcomers, you can welcome them and invite them to the next thing. Now, when they come, also, and Kathy didn't touch on this, but it's helpful to have a way in which, I think I can do it without it if we're not. Oh, there we are. There's a way in which you want to make a way so that people can leave you their information when they're ready to do that. People are very guarded about their information today, right? They want to know how you're going to use it. If you wouldn't mind, in your pew or in your bulletin, there's a little tear off on the back. You just let us know who you are and an email address. We promise we won't bother you with too many emails, but we just want to let you know about what's coming up once or twice. And then most churches that grow, they have a way in which right now, this goes back and forth, but right now the best way to connect is to have the pastor send a brief note in email. Well, not a text, that's too personal. An email that says, we're glad that you came. If you'd like to have a cup of coffee sometime, I routinely go to the Starbucks. Invite them to get to know you as pastor a little bit. As pastor, the most important thing you can do is get to know the newcomers by name. I used to have a cheat sheet of the people who had come last time. Somebody would help me to make it, and then I would have it so that I could, after church, remember. I needed a little help to remember people's names and faces. That's the most significant thing you can do to follow up with newcomers as pastor. But it's for everybody. One of the things that came to mind as Kathy was talking was, y'all be cool. Like when a new person comes, just be cool. Don't overdo it. Don't just like either having a little trouble, just here's a book, and then go back to your. It's easy to overdo it because we've been meeting here. We're enthusiastic. We love new people. We want them to stay. No. Just think of it from their perspective. We didn't get to do this today. In the future, we're going to think about it's something called experience mapping, where you think of it, you think of what it's like, what Kathy was describing, to come to an event in your church as somebody who's new. And then let's go all the way to the bottom, keep going all the way down. The third part. And so the question is, how do we create, keep going, all the way, the ways to go. How do we, that's it, okay. How do we help, back, sorry. Oh, you know what? I've got the clicker now. I can do that. Where are we? Okay, so here we go. So this is, the question is, how do we help people make friends? There are some statistics of if people don't make 2 or 3 new friends within the first 6 months, they'll be gone within 2 years, even if they sign up and join and otherwise participate. They need to make friends. So the question is, how do you facilitate the making of friends? This is the church in Auvers, and it was Van Gogh's one of his last paintings. And what's interesting about it is that there's, from this vantage point, no way in. And it's dark inside too. We need to provide pathways. If you show a picture of your church building, which I don't really recommend necessarily on your website, we think it's really cool. New people, they want to know, show the entrance door to your church, how to get in. When they find their way in, what you want is to think about, I'm going to explain this in a moment. You want to think about what is the next thing I want to invite them to. Always be inviting them. I'm going to skip forward now. Come back. You always want to be inviting them to the next thing. And in order to do that, you have to do a little bit of planning. What is the next thing I can invite these people to? So, for instance, this came from Christ Church in Fairfax, who was with us last time. They have a huge yard sale that focuses on children's, it's a consignment sale. I mean, there are just hundreds of people who line up for this thing. It's become this huge event. And at it, they give these shopping bags for the families who come, the parents who come, and in the bag is an invitation to their children's summer program. I don't remember exactly how it is, but this is the way it goes, right? You think, so we invite people who come, and many of you have blood drives, you have yard sales, you may already have things that are going on. So then you start thinking, what is the next thing that we can use that opportunity to build a little relationship, just make a simple invitation to the next thing so that they come back. Well, at a yard sale for consignment with children, what's the next thing that makes sense? They invite them to like a summer program. At the summer's children's program, they're talking to them about their Sunday school program in the fall. They invite them to come back. You know, you've had a good time here with us. We'd love for this to continue. And we used to have at Bethlehem a night where we would have ice cream, and the families would come, and we would talk about our fall program and sign them up right there, right? And then, so then they're in Sunday school, then you invite them to Christmas Eve. That's a great invite to come back. And then at Christmas Eve, you invite your newcomers to a series that you're having focused on how to resolve conflict. I don't know. You pick one, but you do the next invitation so that they begin to build relationships. They always have something in mind that they can come back to. When it comes to forming friends, there has to be an avenue that we think of for making this happen, and make it clear to them who are coming. How can they make friends? I tell you, what was the circle that you said? Fill a circle. That's not going to do it. But here's where we sometimes think we have all these circles. And why don't we just invite them to those? Those circles are great, and they've been nourishing people for a long period of time. But it's very difficult. It doesn't feel this way. For newcomers, it's really hard to find their way in. And it's better to start a new one. That's what I want to encourage you to do. From the very beginning, we said start 2 new things. One that's religious in nature and one that's not. So it may be a women's study group that would form and have prayer and scripture study as a heart of it. And then one would be a play group and so that you have, if you're focusing on young families, that would be great. Start the 2 of those, start them new, and prime them with some of your own people. But new people connect more easily to new groups than they do to existing ones. You have to do some training. You have to think about what would that be like? Right. Yeah, well, I don't know that you can. I do think that it's best to target. Yeah. I think it goes back to the bless. You listen to them, you develop a relationship with them, offer to have a cup of coffee. Yeah. So we want things that people will, sometimes we want to invite people to one-time events. And then, and hopefully that'll be a good experience to invite them to another one-time event. But you also want to have ongoing events that you can invite people to. Short series work really good for that. So some of you are aware of and have run Financial Peace University of Dave Ramsey, which helps people think about their overwhelming level of debt and how to begin to get at that. That's been really helpful in a lot of places. And it's a short, like it's a set number of times they come, they get to meet people, but then at the end of it, think of what could come next. And it's helpful to not to do too much, but to think of a couple of things that you might try and invite new people to it. I just want to show you this. We talked about this last time. Joseph Myers talks about in a book that he wrote called The Search to Belong, the way people tend to more easily connect to groups. He talks about 4 levels of group: the intimate, which is 2 to 3 people; personal, which is 4 to 12; social, which is 13 to 70; and the public, which is about 100 or more. And his contention is that it's at this social level of about 13 to 70 that newcomers are most likely to socialize well. Why? I think we think it's going to happen here in the small group, right? And the problem with that is it's a little too intimate. So if you're a newcomer and you get into a small group right away, for a lot of them, they may feel like, well, if I don't come back, then it's like there's pressure there. That's not quite right. The social space of 13 to 70, we're about, I don't know, about in that, I don't think we're more than 70. Somebody comes in and out, it's like, well, where are you going? Nobody would say that. It's like, okay, it's more porous. We don't, as church, have as many of these spaces in this size. And I don't know what to do about that except to point it out and to say it's something to consider. If you can make events that are about this size, larger than 13, so about 15, right? 15 to 20 is not a bad, that's a target group. If you're thinking about what will be an easy next step for a newcomer to participate in, something about that size. So for a lot of our churches, like a barbecue, or in our church, King of Kings, we now have back porch, when it's nicer. They have back porch events, which I think they're aiming for more than the intimate. Yes?
The personal side, we saw in churches grow, is that when you enter that side, others
In the personal size, yeah, right. Yeah. And I don't think anybody means it to be. I think people find really a lot of very important things in groups that big, and there's value for that in our congregations. It's just not the place that new people are going to find their way into very easily, very rarely. It does happen, and we think the exception makes the rule, but it doesn't. Okay. And actually, in churches that are a little bit larger, if you can have something in each of these 4 categories, it's ideal. That then provides, because it's helpful to have big public experiences too. For worship, you can be a little anonymous in them. Okay. So these are some of the things that I mentioned. We've talked about these before. This is non-religious groups. Actually, these first 2 are quasi-religious. Dave Ramsey is a faith person, but it doesn't come up right away. It's more toward the end in terms of being generous. MOPS is Mothers of Preschoolers. If you're interested in that, Abiding Presence in Burke, Virginia, has really taken off. They're totally subscribed to that. I think they're overflowing. They may have 2 of those groups now. And they've launched into like a kiddie musical group, which is just wonderful. I forget the name of it. It's clever. A bereavement group, Tables of 8. Do you know what those are? Socializing with like 4 different families. You invite somebody new. You over the course of a year, like you take turns at each other's houses, hosting the dinner, invite somebody else. That's easy to organize in a congregation. Adult sports activities groups. As I mentioned earlier, that's a great place for new people to connect. although you have to watch the intimacy part. Oh, one thing I forgot from the very beginning. When you invite new people, don't just invite them, bring them along. So if you're going to invite them to a sports game, like let's go to the Nationals, you invite them to come with you. That then makes it, right? It's kind of just reminding us how to be normal again. How to just to do this in a way that will work. And you find it like that guy's church when we went to, who came early this morning, Restoration. I went there with my family years ago, and we sat there, and one of my sons had a Robinson sweatshirt on from his high school. And very casually, the woman in front of us at the end of the service turned around and said, I went there as a child. And just struck up a very normal conversation, like it was just, and then it ended, and it was great. That's what we're aiming for. Connections that then, if I were to come back, I know she would remember me, I would remember her. We'd begin that kind of friendship, which I could see happen. So here's some ideas for the more religious groups. Bible overviews. What is the Bible about? We hear a lot about it, but think of it from the vantage point of people who don't know so much. Like instead of somebody told me recently about a non-expert Bible study, which I thought was kind of cool, right? So you don't have to come in and just hear from one expert, the pastor, of what they should know about it, but nobody's an expert. You learn as you look at it together. Discipleship groups. There's courses on Christianity and Lutheran. There's actually a Lutheran course, if you know what that is. You can Google it if you don't. I talked about Blue Christmas Service, Prayers for Healing. They're doing this service of songs and prayer that they're starting tonight at Restoration. Again, they have 400 young adults coming, right? But what they found is there's despite what it may have sounded like, on Sunday morning, they're very Anglican. And they're very rigid in terms of how they worship, very high church. So this for them is the casual meeting. It's the time to have a little more interaction, a little more breathing space with their people. So you can do that also around healing. You can invite people to that. All right, so that's your experience mapping. The last thing I want to leave you with is with an invitation to, there's a lot here, and I had wanted to spend some time for you to think about what you're going to work on and to begin to think about your planning, but I'm going to have to leave that to you to think through making a progression like you saw on the screen of what would come next. It doesn't have to be complicated. Just have something in mind for that newcomer. What is the next thing that we can invite them to? And how can we help them find a way into making friends with other people in this church? That's what Christian community is about. Through knowing other Christians, people will come to faith, and then it's true. There will be more joy in heaven on earth over one new person that's come than over 99 that have been there for a long time. So, Metro DC, we're offering coaching to any leader who wants a coach. If you have a group who wants to be coached and how to do this, the coaching works like this. This is a website called Metro DC Coaches. You can find it through our Synod's website, or just Google this. And there's a way to sign up, and somebody will have a conversation with you about a coach, and it will either be for free or we will help to pay for one. A coach helps a group of people or an individual think through their plans. It doesn't give them the exact formula to follow, but it helps them to think through, here's what I'm thinking. I got a lot of ideas. How do I help focus in and make one or two key changes in what I'm doing? So we've developed a coaching cohort that is available to every congregation, and we'd love for you to take advantage of it. And I'm going to end there, and we're going to have some prayers to lead us out with. I'm hopeful to put as much of this on the website as we can, so you can download and use it for others. I hope that we can teach what we're teaching here in a way that you can then teach to others. So go back, and if you need help to pull down some of those things, maybe we can make your website, your PowerPoint available with those key points of what to do with your website. but we want you to take this and make a simple plan in whatever way that you think is most valuable. Okay. Any questions before we wind up? Yes. Yeah, I think we will have the PowerPoint online. Yeah, so you can go to Metro DC and New Connections, and it will be right. Yeah. I hope this is helpful. We'll learn as we go. What I've tried to present are not my best ideas, but what I've seen working in other places. And what I see in congregations across, particularly in our area, that are growing. And to present those to you as ideas to consider.
Most of you know how to respond. God is good. And all the time. Thanks be to God for that. I'd invite you to stand as we close our time with prayer. Dear God, you have been gracious to us. You have been present in our lives and in this place, and we are so grateful for those unexpected times and places where you have pierced our hearts and become present to us in our time of need. Dear God, you know what it is that we seek. You know what it is that every single person that comes into our sacred spaces seek. Dear God, make us those things that we may be your vessel, that we may be guided by your grace, by your Holy Spirit, and that we may be part of what it is that our community, our world needs today and every day. We thank you for your grace and for your mercy, and we love you. In Jesus' name. And now receive a blessing. May you yearn to reach out and tell your friends about Jesus and his love. May you be eager yet cool as you welcome in all and every newcomer into your sacred spaces. May you hold on to newcomers with intention and grace. And may Almighty God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit be among you now and forevermore. Amen. Thank you for being with us. Reciban la bendición. Que el deseo de contar del amor de Jesús a sus amistades y conocidos aumente día a día más y más. Que le des la bienvenida a todos y a todas las personas que entren a sus espacios sagrados con fervor y sencillez. Que formen relaciones fuertes e ungidas con todos y todas las que lleguen a nuestros y a nuestras iglesias. Y que el Dios Todopoderoso, Padre, Hijo y Espíritu Santo, sea con ustedes hoy y para siempre. Amén.